Okay, so how did I get into finger drumming? Well, for that, we have to go back to 2014 when a friend of mine was graduating from film school and she asked me to compose the film score for that movie. Obviously, I was honored. I said yes, and I figured it was a great opportunity for me to kind of take on a big challenge like that, because up until then I only worked on small projects like one little commercial track or one little friend project or something like that, but never an entire score. So a couple of weeks in, I found myself in a familiar situation, which is I was looking for the right drum loop to accompany a track that I had in my head, and I couldn't find it. That's basically how things would go for me. Every time I would try and make a song, I would always start by firing up Stylus RMX. That's this program by Spectrasonics. And I would fire it up and I would go through all the loops and percussion things, and I would kind of gather what I thought was good and then start building a track on top of that. And what would usually happen is that I couldn't find exactly what I was looking for, but it would be something that was close, and then I would alter my idea so that I could still kind of get what I had in my head, but it never was really what I had in my head. So with the film score, I was in the same situation. I couldn't really find the right drum loop. And by that point, because it was such a large project, I got increasingly frustrated with this, because what would happen before is I would do one song for somebody in a day, and I would spend half the day looking for the right track. I would find something that was more or less okay. I would accept it. I would make the track. I would send it to the person and I would be done with it, right? And I would forget how frustrating it was. But with this movie thing, it was like days and days on end where I would spend most of my time looking for the right drum accompaniment. So I got increasingly frustrated, and that's basically when I decided to do something different. I had to make this sexy D'Angelo "How Does It Feel Like" track. So it was very obvious what had to happen. I just knew what the drum part had to be. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to make it myself. So I got this thing out of the closet. It's a Korg Pad Control. This is a Korg Pad Control that's, I think, 10 or 11 years old. I bought it in 2008, I think. And I never used it because, I don't know, I just bought it. You know, you buy stuff for your studio, you think it makes you a better musician, and then in the end, you don't use them. But so I fired up the Korg Pad Control, and I fired up this Abbey Road drum kit from Native Instruments. And I was like, well, let's see if I can play it myself. So I set one of the pads to a hi-hat, and I just pressed the hi-hat button, and then I pressed the kick button and the snare, and I built that beat by myself. I had to quantize it, obviously. And but I was surprised by how well it sounded right away. And I was also pretty happy with like the workflow. It was actually way easier than I thought to create a drum beat by myself, just from imagining what it should be and then typing it in. So basically from that point on, in the next few weeks/months, I started using the pad control, not really for finger drumming, like all the parts at the same time, but I would just play the kick, just play the snare, and then play the hi-hat. Do the things separately, but I would use it, and I would get increasingly familiar with this Abbey Road drum kit that I was using, and I just grew fond of it. Okay, so by the time that movie thing was kind of done, I got another call from 3 girls from a local band here. They're a band called Zazie, and they actually had gotten a record company to give them a huge studio budget to record a record. They got like 15,000 euros, I think. That's $18,000. And the dad of a friend of mine recommended me as a producer, even though I never produced an entire record before. And somehow they trusted the guy. They called me, we met up, they liked me, they trusted me. And they were like, you know what, let's just try, let's just work together and try and make this into a nice record. So all of a sudden, when I was wrapping up my first film score, I also got this job as a producer to create a full-length album with a studio budget and everything. So I was super excited. I made this little budget thing, and I realized, like, hey, this is cool. This is the first time I can actually hire studio musicians, like a drummer, for example. Okay, so a few weeks later, we were in the studio for the first time, and we decided it was good to start with recording all the drums and then layer all the other instruments over that. So we called the drummer. The drummer had played with the band before, and he was there for like 3 or 4 full-time days where we just did drums. We had an engineer. The engineer put all the awesome Neumann mics and everything in this awesome drum room. drummer started playing with the click track, and we recorded take after take, and I would say something like, yeah, maybe hold back there a little bit, give more power there, maybe switch your sticks, or maybe switch to brushes, try this, try that. And the guy would just do what I told him. And I was very excited about it. I was like, wow, this is great, right? You cannot tell a computer what to do, but this it's just a human connection, human interaction. You can just say what you want and you'll get it. So I was very happy. But a couple of days / weeks later, when we were working with the drum tracks, I realized something that was a bit confronting, which was basically the drummer wasn't a bad drummer. He did his job, and I did my job to the best of my abilities, and we got some good drum takes. But the reality of it was that I was still spending a lot of time. Like this time, I wasn't looking for the right drum sample, but I was looking for the right drum take, And when you get a good drum take, maybe it was not played with the right sound, or maybe the beginning of the drum take was very good, but then the ending was a bit like, the energy would go down, and we had to replace it, or we had to cut an earlier part and put it at the end, and blah blah blah. So we were kind of cutting and pasting again, and that was actually strangely familiar to me because that looked a lot like this thing that I would do with drum samples, right? Looking for the right drum sample, then cutting it, pasting it, doing stuff with it, blah 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 blah. It was basically the same thing all over again. In the end, I was very happy with the record that we made. I was very happy with the songs, also very happy with the drums. But by that time, I had these 3 things in my head that kind of came together. Like, one is, it sucks to look for drum samples. 2 is, recording real drums and getting them right kind of sucks too, or at least it's very, very hard and it costs a lot of money. 3 is, hey, this Korg pad control thing, that was actually quite a discovery, because that made this whole movie music making thing pretty efficient, and everything went fast and it was easy. So that's basically when I started opening up to the idea of, hey, why not use this thing more? Why not try and get better at using a device like this for drumming? So I think somewhere in autumn 2014, after all the projects were done, I still had that thought in my mind. And I was like, hey, you know what? I'm going to try and research this. Are there people who play a pad controller like it's a real drum kit? And are people using it, for drumming? And I actually stumbled upon this guy called David Haynes. A lot of you guys will know him. I actually had seen movies of him before, like 10 years back. Like, he just goes haywire on a pad controller, right? That guy is a beast. And so I found him again. I watched some of his movies. I was blown away. I was like, damn, this guy, such a great finger drummer. And I decided to send him an email like, hey, David, can you give me some lessons? Because he said in his videos that he gave Skype lessons. So I sent him this email, hey, can I take some lessons with you? I'm interested in learning finger drumming. And obviously, I didn't expect him to reply right away. So I started researching myself and trying to find tutorials, to do in the meantime. And the first thing that struck me was how little there was out there. I mean, I think Express Pads just came out. There were a few like small YouTube movies where some dude would explain a little thing, but then that was it, And somehow Express Pads didn't really work for me. So I was messing around with this myself actually for a few weeks. And I think I found this video where a guy explained a pad layout that was basically kick, snare, hi-hat, kick, snare, hi-hat, open hi-hat, open hi-hat. And that one felt good to me from the start. And a few weeks in, I changed like those 2 open hi-hats for this is just an open hi-hat in between those and the ride over there, and that made it even better. And I looked for the right place for the toms and the cymbals, and I kind of developed my own little thing. I got this drum DVD, like how to play Stuart Copeland, and I tried to play some stuff from Stuart Copeland. So a few weeks later, I realized that David Haynes never replied to my email. So I went onto his channel again because I figured maybe I sent it to an old email address or something that he isn't using. And I clicked on this one video where he was giving tips or something. I can't find it anymore. And one of the tips, I don't remember the other ones, but one of the tips was this. He said, be an innovator. And he said, you always have to try and do your own thing or give your own twist to things. And don't just try and copy what other people are doing. And so I saw that. And that's basically when a lot of stuff kind of clicked in my head. it was almost like, you know, a sign from above, where I realized, like, hey, I already started doing this. I already started doing this my own way. I researched what pad layout to use. I changed it a little bit to my liking. I searched for online drumming tutorials. I tried to translate them to the pad controller. I'm actually already on my own little path towards becoming a finger drummer. I just realized, like, hey, there's not that much stuff out there. There's so much room for different perspectives on how to play this thing. I mean, if you look at how many guitar players there are in the world, how many good guitar players who all have their own way of playing the instrument, that's thousands of them. So I was like, yeah, there's room for another person who just comes in and does things his own way. And I mean, David Haynes said it. So that's basically when I decided, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to figure out how to play this thing. I'm going to figure out how to play this thing well. And when I figure that out, I'm going to share it with the world and hopefully get more people into finger drumming and make this thing a normal instrument, like, for example, like guitar or real drums. Yeah, so that's how I got started in 2014. And 2 years later, in 2016, I recorded a record where all the drums are finger drums played by me. I'll link to it below. It's called the Guilty Johnny EP, and it's very nice. And they actually just released it 2 years after we recorded it. 1 year later, in 2017, I started working on this thing that's now the Quest for Groove, and I'm talking to you guys and I'm telling my story. And I have very high hopes for this instrument. I think there's so much possible with this thing, and I think I've only barely scratched the surface. And if you look at other people, like for example Jeremy Ellis, who uses the drum sounds together with other sounds or with loops or anything, like the possibilities are endless. And I'm already looking forward to Quest for Groove student that in a few years will do something that will blow my mind, because you know, he started off learning what I taught him, or she started off learning what I taught her, and kind of did his or her own thing with it and shares that with the world. I'm really looking forward to that. Okay, so that was my finger drumming story so far. I'll be back next week with a lesson on how to play a reggae groove. And in the meantime, you can leave your own story or your own thing on how you got started in finger drumming below. And I hope to see you again next week. Bye.